Hi and welcome everyone. It's Pamela Lavitt from the Strom Jewish Community Center, the Director of Arts and Ideas and Festivals. I am so happy to see everyone joining us today. I'm very excited that we have an incredible conversation with three incredible authors. You can see their bios are rotating right now, but we have Taylor Lustig and Molly Dillon who are here for Yes She Can. And before I introduce them in a moment, I'm going to say a few things about some house business, but we're very excited also to have Jill Wine-Banks join us. And in partnership with the Jewish Book Council and Island Books, we are very thrilled to have another book festival in your living room, which is a series that we've been running since September. And as you can see, we have a lot of incredible programs coming up. This event is being recorded. Those of you who are part of the ticketed community will be receiving a private link to view this afterwards. So in case you missed it or you have to log off because your dog is barking or something like that, you will have a chance to watch this conversation in its entirety. And we're also very grateful for KUOW Public Radio for also partnering with us on making this available through their blog afterwards. So those links will be coming to you shortly. So again, I'm Pamela Lavitt, the Director of Arts and Ideas, and I just wanted to say a couple of things about some upcoming events. This month, we focused a little bit on author conversations, which is a slightly new strategy for us. Instead of having one author at a time to create a topical conversation. And whether you're relieved or not, I think this conversation about women in the White House or women who have prosecuted the White House is happening at a slightly different moment. And we just didn't know what was going to happen after November 3rd. So I think that we're looking forward to a very inspiring conversation from our authors and hopefully a look back at their working in and around the White House and what it meant to be a sort of young go-getter making a difference in Washington. So with that, I just wanted to invite everyone to join us for a couple of more things that are happening this weekend. I'm very excited to join you for an incredible conversation. We have about 20 partners in the Black Jewish Reverend and Rabbi clergy group here locally in Seattle. We are going to be holding a Zoom conversation about a film called Shared Legacies, which is about the African-American Jewish relationship during civil rights. It is a documentary film. It will be screening, there it is, on November 12th through November 15th. And then the Black Jewish clergy group are coming in for a workshop style dialogue and conversation to recharge and renew that conversation that has languished in our community and nationally over the last 20 and 30 years, you could even say. So we're regenerating that conversation and recharging it by bringing the Black Jewish dialogue and conversation to you. So please join us. It's going to be a wonderful event. And the Zoom is this Sunday, November 15th. With that, I'm going to go ahead and now introduce our panelists. I am thrilled to have them joining us today. And as you filter in one by one, please join us. First of all, I want to introduce the two women from Yes She Can. The compiler, Molly Dillon, is here to join us. She's a policy, strategy, and communications consultant and a former policy advisor in the Office of Urban Affairs, Justice, and Opportunity in the White House Domestic Policy Council. Her bio goes on. And what I love is that if you go to the Yes She Can website, it's a phenomenal website. And you can actually click on all of the women who are the contributors. There are 10 women who contributed to this compiled book, which is really great for both teenagers and for your grandparents. I think it has such a cross-generational appeal, and it's a beautiful book. So Molly, you did a great job, and come and join us, please. I also am so happy. Taylor Lustig was supposed to be with us in April, and this is a postponed program in so many ways for her. We danced back and forth, and finally it'll have to be virtual instead of physical. But Taylor Lustig is a contributor also to Yes She Can. She is a co-author. She served in the White House from age 20 to age 26. Most recently as a policy advisor for the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, part of the Domestic Policy Council. She can tell you a little bit more about her work in community engagement. And currently she is working, I think you're still working at PepsiCo, but Taylor is a communicator, advocate, partnership, and coalition builder, and we're so happy to have her join us here today. And now I am extremely pleased and very honored to have Jill Wine-Banks join us. Many of you see Jill regularly on MSNBC. She is a legal analyst. She is an author of Watergate Girl, which is an incredible book. And it just so, it's, you know, a doppelganger moment for us to hear from her, obviously what it meant to be, to prosecute someone in the White House. And obviously we'll hear a lot more about that. But Jill is, you know, she was one of 3 assistant Watergate special prosecutors in the obstruction of justice trial against President Nixon, and dealt with a lot of, I would say, misogyny while she was doing so, and still managed to do incredible things. She served on many boards, including ADL and so on and so forth. She is a graduate of University of Illinois and Columbia University, and lives in Chicago, where she's joining us from. And I'm also just really pleased to welcome our moderator today, a good friend to the Seattle Jewish Film Festival, which I've run for a long time and has had many of our guests on air from Arts and Ideas. Ross Reynolds is KUOW's executive producer for community engagement. Please welcome all of our guests. I'm going to see you all at the end. Please, just a couple of housekeeping items. We are going to ask that you please submit your questions anytime, but in the Q&A. The chat reserved for anything that you need to tell me or any questions that you have for Ross Reynolds, but please submit your questions in the Q&A box and we'll get to all of them. Welcome everyone, so glad you made it. And thank you very much, panelists, for being here.
And I look so forward to talking to you each about both Watergate and the Obama administration, the subject of your new books. But I'd like to start by drawing on some of your experience to comment on the current moment, new president, disputed election. Jill Wine-Banks, you're a lawyer and a legal analyst for MSNBC. What can you tell us about the Trump supporters' legal action challenging the outcome of the election?
In polite language, it won't hold water. There is not a shred of legal substance behind any of the suits that I've seen. They will, even by the judges that Donald Trump has appointed, they will be thrown out. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that the defense should ask for the court costs, the cost of defending. I know the lawyers are probably acting pro bono, but they don't have to. They can submit a bill. And frankly, where there is a frivolous lawsuit, the opposing party is entitled to collect their costs. So I'm not at all worried. There could not possibly be anything that will overturn the will of the people. More votes were cast for Joe Biden than have ever been cast for any other candidate. And the differential between the two is one of the greatest in our history. So I am not concerned that on January 20th, Joe Biden will become the president.
Well, in fact, the Washington Post headline said Biden's margins are far too large to be overcome by litigation. Will the cases continue even if their outcome won't alter the results of the election? I mean, how long can this drag out in the courts?
I think that the courts will start throwing them out and start assessing costs as a way of preventing them from dragging on, wasting court time, and hurting the credibility of our democracy and our election. That is something that I'm seriously concerned about. This may be the time for the 25th Amendment, even by the most loyal of his cabinet members, because his behavior now has gotten to the point of being really irrational, and he's hurting in terms of foreign affairs. He's interfering with the transition. We can't have FBI security clearances for the people that are working on the transition, who need those clearances in order to get the kind of briefings that you get during a transition. So a few days delay won't make a big difference. But the longer this goes on, the more serious the interference is.
Another legal question, and we'll get onto the subject of your books, but many of us can remember the 2000 election decided when the US Supreme Court stepped in and stopped the recount in Florida, resulting in the Bush presidency. What are the chances of any of these cases getting to the Supreme Court where there's a new conservative majority?
You know, in Florida, there was a 500 and I think maybe 17 vote differential. 500. We're talking about 5 million. There is no way that you can undo the election results. Maybe there's one or two that had a hanging chad in Florida. Maybe there's one or two that had a double ballot cast, but there's not 5 million. So the election results are not going to be overturned no matter what a court says. So I think people need to take a deep breath and try to relax. I need bad advice for myself too, because I'm not relaxed. I won't relax until January 20th at 12:01. Then maybe I can take a deep breath and relax.
Well, if this were an ordinary election by now, President Trump would have conceded and we'd be well underway in beginning the transition period. And Molly, I understand you were around for the transition period at the end of the Obama administration. What should be happening now based on what you went through at that time?
Yeah, so I was in the Obama administration until the very end. And at this point in, 4 years ago, we were preparing, binders of information for the incoming staff. They were having briefings with the National Security Council, kind of counterpoints were coming in. And we were meeting with the folks who were coming in to replace us. That I should clarify though, I worked on the civil rights policy team with that very long title. We were not replaced, but there are folks who are working on domestic policy. And so they came in and met with our domestic policy advisor who reported to the president. And I was reflecting on this because yesterday actually was the 4-year anniversary of the day after the election and coming into work that day, and had a lot of rally the troops, pep talks from our chief of staff, Dennis McDonough, from other, leaders around the administration. The peaceful transition of power was emphasized to us more than once that day. And I remember being almost surprised or confused because to me, I was like, well, yeah, duh. Like, of course we're gonna have a peaceful, we're gonna revolt and overthrow the government. And this was not the outcome I wanted, but this is the outcome we got. And our responsibility now is for a peaceful transition of power. And the fact that it had to be emphasized to us seemed almost ludicrous. But now with age and wisdom, and after going through a tyrannical, semi-fascist presidency, I think we see why those things aren't just norms, they have to be said out loud.
Joe Weinbanks, I want to get to the subject of your book, The Watergate Girl. And I lived through the Watergate years, and it feels very similar today in this country because the country is so divided. And as I read back through your account, I recall that it was very possible that Nixon could have gotten away with it, it felt like at times. When you were working on the Watergate case, was there a moment when you felt as though, oh, this case is going to collapse and this is not going to really work out the way we intended?
No, I honestly don't think so. And to understand my answer, the reason I'm saying that, we were appointed in May of '73. By that point, the burglars had been convicted for the break-in. They were caught in the Democratic National Committee offices in the Watergate complex. And we had the benefit of one of those defendants, James McCord, who was the chief of security for Nixon's re-election committee, and one of the defendants, because he was caught inside the DNC, had written a letter to Judge Sirica, basically pleading for a better sentence, saying, "You're right, Your Honor, all through the trial you kept asking, higher ups were involved, perjury was committed, hush money was paid." So we pretty much had a conspiracy, obstruction of justice laid out for us by one of the defendants. And as soon as that happened, John Dean, who is an incredible witness, he had an amazing memory, decided that he would cooperate. And he was a phenomenal person who could remember details that you would be surprised, because he was ushered out of the White House. He was fired and didn't have any of his diaries or papers. He was just ushered out and was testifying completely from memory. And he made one mistake in testifying before the Senate, and that was to say something happened at the Mayflower Hotel, which became famous in this administration because there was a Russian contact with Attorney General Sessions at that hotel, but it actually occurred in the Mayflower coffee shop of a different hotel. That's a sort of meaningless kind of mistake, but he was completely accurate when he said, on such and such a date, I told the president there was a cancer growing on the presidency. We got the tape of that, and that's exactly what his words were. So I always felt that the evidence was clear, and we also had the benefit of a very different media landscape. Now we have silos, and people who listen to MSNBC have a set of information which is based on, I believe, facts. And then you have all the people who listen to Fox News who have a completely different set of information that is based on conspiracy theories and made up information. But they believe it. And so the problem is it's harder to have a discussion about the meaning of something if you don't agree on the underlying facts. And back then people did agree. So we had bipartisanship. We didn't have the kind of gerrymandering that's led to no bipartisan cooperation. And Republicans voted for articles of impeachment. And it was Republicans who went to the president after we got what was called the smoking gun tape and said to the president, if you do not resign, you will be convicted in a trial in the Senate. And Richard Nixon said to Senator Goldwater, well, I have your support, don't I? He said, no, you don't even have my support. So
Jill, I have to ask, even after the Saturday Night Massacre, you were as confident this was going to go forward. And for those of you who don't recall, the Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, was told to fire the special prosecutor. He wouldn't do it. He quit. The Assistant Attorney General also quit after being given that order, and the special prosecutor was fired. Wasn't that a chilling evening for you when you think about how this was going to go forward?
Yes. And I guess I might have to sort of backtrack on my answer a little, because there was a period of time that happened on October 20th. But on October 23rd, so it lasted 3 days, because on October 23rd, public pressure was so enormous that Richard Nixon had to reverse. He said, okay, I will give you the tapes. I'll stop stonewalling. I will appoint a new special prosecutor, because he had fired the special prosecutor and his attorney general and his deputy attorney general, who wouldn't carry out his firing order. So I guess for those 3 days, and during that 3 days, by the way, we didn't know whether our office had been abolished and we had been fired. It turns out in retrospect that the office had been merged into the Department of Justice, which means it's not an independent investigation agency, but none of us had been fired. Only Archie Cox was fired. And 3 days later, it was all unwound, and we went about our business and kept gathering information. The smoking gun tape was a second set of subpoenas. The Saturday Night Massacre we had subpoenaed just 9 tapes. And then after the indictments, we did a trial subpoena for 64 more tapes. And it was really that one of those tapes that was the smoking gun that led to the Republicans going to Richard Nixon and saying, you have to retire.
Well, I really hope we'll only have 3 days of uncertainty, but I don't think that's the case right at the moment.
I think we've exceeded it right now.
Jill Weinbanks, back to your work as the Watergate prosecutor. You were referred to as the mini-skirted lawyer. Was it stressful in that moment to deal with that patronizing attitude towards you and your work?
What do you think? Yes, of course it was. It was horrifying. You have to understand that at the time, only 4% of all lawyers in the country were women. And of that 4%, almost none were trial lawyers. So I was in a unique position, and people didn't always know how to treat me. In fact, one of the pictures I've shared with that maybe someone could pull up is a headline in the New York Times that lists me as mini-skirted lawyer. But honestly, every news story did say what I wore in court before it said what I said in court. And that's horrifying. And there were many other examples of what I would consider to be completely discriminatory, sexist behavior. The judge interrupting my cross-examination of one of the defendants by saying, Mr. Mardian, don't you know you can never win an argument with a lady? And you know, your heart stops, the blood flows from your body, but he's the judge and there's nothing you can say. You have to smile and go on. So it was a very different era. One of the titles I considered for my book was Dancing Backwards in High Heels.
The Ginger Rogers
and
quote.
That's the pin that I'm wearing today, is Dancing Backwards in High Heels, because to me, it reflects the hurdles that women had to overcome. It was said of Ginger Rogers, who danced with Fred Astaire and had to do everything he did, only backwards and in high heels. And women in the 70s had to do everything better to be considered half as good as men. And the publisher is the one who decides on a title. And yeah, there's a lawyer in miniskirts. I mean, this is the New York Times. This isn't some rag. And by the way, pictures of me were almost always full length, whereas my colleagues all had headshots. And my
So-
skirts weren't that short. It's what was available. If you went to a store, that's what they sold. I mean, unless I had custom made clothes, and by the way, it was illegal, or maybe not illegal, but I could not wear pants in court. My first trial was in Alaska. It was 30 below zero, not wind chill, 30 below on a thermometer. And I had to wear a skirt. I could not wear pants. So it just wasn't allowed in a federal court for a woman to wear pants.
So
So
why
yeah, it was pretty hard.
why'd you call it the book, The Watergate Girl? I mean,
Okay, that's because the publisher said to me, my editor, who is fantastic, he said, first of all, what captures the era better than The Watergate Girl? And I thought about it, and he was really right, because I was actually called Girl. In the book, I tell one story about getting my first trial. And first I had to realize that I was being discriminated against, that all lawyers who start at the Department of Justice Organized Crime start by arguing appeals. And it's a great way to learn the mistakes of a courtroom and to see what trial lawyers did wrong so you don't do that. But the guys that I started with were starting to try cases, and I was still arguing appeals. So I had no one to ask. I had no peers. I decided I'd go to the boss, and I said, Henry, how come I'm still doing appeals? I want to try cases. You hired me as a trial attorney. He said, oh, but Jill, you're a girl, and it'd be so much worse for you. In appellate court, it's just lawyers. In a trial court, the defendants are made members of the mob. You're going to be with the mafia, and you're just too vulnerable. And I insisted, saying, you hired me as a trial lawyer. I want to try cases. And that's how I got my first trial, was standing up for myself. And that trial happened to be in Alaska, which I think played into it, because they thought, oh my gosh, it's so far away. What could happen in Alaska? It's going to be different. It's different than if it was in the Southern District of New York. So that was how I got my first trial, and I felt it did. The second thing the publisher said is, think about how many books with the title Girl are bestsellers. Girl with a Dragon Tattoo, Girl on the Train. And I decided, well, I'd never written a book, and they know what sells. So I also didn't like the picture they selected. But again, that's up to the publisher. I had more input into the pictures that are on the inside of the book, but on the cover, they get to pick it. And again, I gave in to them, saying, okay, you know what sells books, I don't. Sure. So I let them put that picture, which I thought, my eyes are squinting, my hair is blowing, my skirt is blowing between my leg, but luckily the subtitle sort of covers that up. You can't tell. So I thought it was not a good picture.
Just a couple of years ago, Jill, you wrote an article called Expect Sexist Treatment in the Workplace so that you will see it and make the necessary steps to stop it. So my question for you is, has anything changed from those days in the 1970s that you talk about in this book? And my question for you, Molly and Taylor, is that should women expect sexist treatment in the workplace so that if you see it, you can take the necessary steps to stop it? First of all, Jill, has anything changed?
Yes, a lot has changed. I mean, now you have 50% of a law class is female. And as the numbers filter in, the law profession is also getting to be more equal. But I speak at a lot of law schools and colleges, and I know from talking to the women students that they too are experiencing some discriminatory behavior. And I still think that, and maybe expect is the wrong word, especially now after the Me Too movement. Maybe you shouldn't expect it, but you should be aware that it may happen and that you need to deal with it. And one of the things in my book, I mean, I tried to show a system where democracy worked and justice prevailed, but I also, through my stories, I found how much sexism had impacted my career and my life. And so a lot of the stories relate to things that happened to me that I consider to be sexist. And through that, I show how I dealt with each one of those. And each is different. There's no set rule about how to respond. And sometimes it's with humor. Sometimes it's with grace. Sometimes it's with a demand that you be recognized. I got Rosemary Woods as my witness because I stood up for myself and said to my trial partner, you're taking too many witnesses. I'm taking the next witness the White House calls, and then we're sharing equally after that. And the next witness called was Rosemary Woods.
Molly and Taylor, you worked in the White House and the Obama White House. I'm kind of curious of what you think about the title of that, and Jill did want to modify it for now, but the article written 2 years ago was "Expect Sexist Treatment in the Workplace so that you will see it and take the necessary steps to stop it." What was your experience in the White House, a high pressure place with lots of stuff going on with sexism? Taylor, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just Googled that article because I will be reading it later. And I think it's—
I'll remember it. I just have to tell you, I have no idea that I wrote it, but
it's right there on Medium. Maybe I'll send the link in the chat. But I think it's one of those things. It's similar to, we know that during stressful times, it's important. Self-care is important. And, you're supposed to eat well and exercise, for 20 minutes a day, but being told that helps you take action on it and identify the stressor maybe. And I think that article title is kind of similar to that. My experience in the White House was when we worked there, I was 22, 23, 24 years old. And there were many young people from all different backgrounds and experiences. And it really was an empowering place to work. And I didn't experience blatant sexism in the workplace in that sense. But, we like to talk about how in the executive office building, there are photos of former secretaries of war on the wall. And sometimes it's these external reminders and pressures of just a bunch of white men kind of staring down at you when you're giving a presentation or hosting a meeting or whatever it is that the work that you're doing at your job. And that those pressures, you kind of have to block them away and remember that you have a place there too, and you have every right to be there.
Molly, if not blatant sexism, did you experience some things that Taylor mentioned that kind of gave you pause?
So yeah, I had a very similar experience to Taylor. The Obama White House, especially in the second term when I was there, was quite diverse. I also worked on the team that handled gender equity. So gender equity policy and like women's rights. So I was very fortunate to work in a very empowering atmosphere. And so I want to, start by saying that. I will say the worst thing that ever happened, and it was the worst thing by like leaps and bounds, because it really was a great place to work, was a comment by someone from the outside who was meeting with my team. And after I asked a lot of questions in this meeting, it was me and my boss, who never introduced me as his assistant, his staffer, his blah, blah, blah. It was my colleague, Molly. And after the meeting, this man who was about my parents' age, a little older probably, said to me, "You asked a lot of tough questions in there. Was your father a lawyer?" And I thought Jill might find that particularly entertaining. And I was so stunned in the moment, I was probably 25 years old, that I was just like, no, like you laugh because sometimes it just catches you off guard, even someone who's thinking about these issues all the time. But that question is so offensive on so many levels. Like one, I mean, no offense to all my lawyers that I know and love, but like you don't have to be a lawyer to ask tough questions. So there's that. There's the idea that I couldn't ask tough questions unless my parents were someone accomplished, that it had to be my father, not my mother. I'm like, maybe I'm a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. I do have a master's degree, from Georgetown University, but apparently like that's not good enough for this guy. So, but I do think that question was almost like it was traveling through time to meet me in that moment in like 2015. But that being said, I work a lot on gender equity. So I think Jill's article, which I also will be reading, is right. And the caveat I would add is that but we don't have to put up with it.
Right.
I know that it's prevalent, especially today. I mean, if you look at, there's an article from a few years ago that they did a research that 60% of women in Silicon Valley in tech jobs report having been sexually harassed at work, which is a form of discrimination. And that number is probably underreported, which then becomes part of an equal pay problem. Like all these issues are intertwined. So I'm thinking about them constantly. And I'm really, inspired by a lot of the legal changes that we've been seeing in the laws, especially I live in New York. New York City changed the threshold for sexual harassment to make it easier to prosecute those claims. And then New York State recently followed, and I hope that other states also follow. But yeah, I mean, like, Taylor and I were able to work in the White House mostly uninterrupted by our gender, because people like Jill were there kind of paving the way before us. And I wore skirts, I wore pants, I almost never wore heels.
I have to ask you though, I have to stop you. You said mostly.
Yeah.
Not entirely.
I mean, yeah, I mean, as you've seen, that comment, but again, the atmosphere that I experienced was supportive, and that behavior had no place in the White House. If someone had said something like that to me who was a staffer, I mean, they'd be out. So I was quite lucky in that regard.
Well, along with Jill's article, expect sexist treatment in the workplace, so you will see it and take the necessary steps to stop it. May I recommend, shameless plug time, the KUOW podcast. It's called Battle Tactics for Your Sexist Workplace. And it has instructions and ideas and thoughts on how to deal with issues in the workplace if you face them. Battle Tactics for Your Sexist Workplace. Check it out. Reading over through Yes, She Can, it's the story of a group of women who in their 20s got to work on policy issues in the Obama White House. And that was just amazing to me. So I got to ask each of you, how did you ever get to that opportunity to do that? That is such an amazing story to tell, to be at such a young age working at the highest level of the United States government. Taylor, how did you get there?
A lot of luck, hard work, but a lot of luck and chance. I grew up on the north side of Chicago, and I went to a state school in Texas, and did a semester abroad in Washington, D.C., which I had an internship at a think tank working on anti-poverty policy. It's a long way of saying, like, I just happened to take this experience, met some people along the way. And one of my mentors from that internship suggested that I apply for the White House internship program. And I thought she was crazy, but I filled out the application. And I've been told by my supervisor during that program that she was looking to take a chance on somebody that she ordinarily wouldn't pick up a resume from, and had no offense to any Ivy League affiliations or folks on the call, but she was looking for something different. And so she said, let's try this Texas Longhorn girl. And through that, staying connected, I was able to take a year off and come back on staff when there was an opening in the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships in the same domestic policy council that I had interned in.
In a moment, I want to follow up on some of your work there, but Molly, how did you get this great opportunity? Do you have to know someone?
Similar to Taylor, I also started as an intern, and that was the story of a lot of folks in the administration, either started as interns, started as campaign staffers, or were like truly at the top of their fields in academia and advocacy. Our boss, Cecilia Munoz, was a MacArthur Genius Award winner who was an immigration policy expert. So I was not coming in at quite that level. I was coming in as a former intern. I interned in between the 2 years of my graduate degree. And something that was true of the White House internship program when we participated in it was unpaid, which I'm hoping to see a change in, the next administration, as well as on the Hill and, in places all over the country, that we actually pay our interns. I think there has been this idea for a long time that, it's good experience, you're building a resume, we're giving you something that is valuable, but what you're doing is you're actually eliminating a whole class of kids who can't afford to work unpaid. And one of the reasons we wrote Yes, She Can was to bring in a more diverse group of people into public service. And that also means socioeconomic. I was lucky I got a scholarship from Georgetown to do public policy, unpaid public policy. So I could pay my rent and eat and buy those pantsuits that I thought I had to wear when I started the White House. I was not wearing pantsuits by the end. It's not my style. Yeah, started as an intern.
Well, you both mentioned luck as part of getting to the White House at that young age, but what's your advice to any young people listening who might like to work at the White House? What should they do? Molly?
So they can check out our book. I don't mean to plug it, but truly, I happen to have a copy here. At the end, something that we did on purpose just for these kinds of questions, because getting into the White House, government, public service in general can be kind of confusing. It's not like applying to medical school. It's not, my brother has a PhD in science. It's a very clear path, what you have to do. And what we wrote was, I'll show you here, it's the Girl's Guide to Getting into Government. We also use the word girl, mostly for the alliteration. It applies to everyone. But we have different ways to get into government internship programs, jobs, things to think about, state level, local, et cetera. But the very first one is the White House internship program. We talk about that, how many of us started that way. So that's a great way if you're a student or recently graduated. And then also the presidential transition they will take resumes from the public at some point. And so some folks literally just submit their resumes and get chosen that way. So crazier things have happened. So, and submit your resume if you want to serve.
Taylor, go ahead.
Oh, can I just add one thing? When Molly and I and our co-authors have done talks around the country and with schools, one thing that we like to share also is that working in government, you don't have to be a policy expert right away or have a passion for politics. Government needs people to serve who are passionate about science, about space, about vaccines and healthcare. So there's a variety, there's a way to serve for everyone. And so we'd like to tell people, focus on what you're passionate about. And if service, you'll find a way to weave service into that passion.
Well, not a lot of opportunity for either of you at the White House for the last 8 years. Molly, you've gone and become an independent policy consultant. Taylor, you're working on government affairs at PepsiCo, but now the Democrat is headed towards the White House. It seems like with your backgrounds, you could get back in, even at the White House level. Are either of you going to pursue that? Taylor?
Sure. I'm not really sure right now. I think for the longest time, honestly, this is like super personal, but at the beginning of the Trump administration, after working my butt off for 3 years and for the Obama administration, I saw how good government works, and seeing what the Trump administration was doing to some of the projects that I worked on or my colleagues worked on was very upsetting. And I kind of shut it out and said, like, I really enjoy my job at PepsiCo. I do community affairs and I get to, work on social impact programs, and it's a great job. But now I'm starting to slowly feel the itch, do I want to serve again? Just knowing how good it feels to be in that environment and have that opportunity. So the truth is, I don't know, I'll probably try to pursue something and see where it goes.
Molly, have you sent your resume? You picking up the phone? You making some calls?
I would say that it's a very exciting time. And also there's so much to fix. Like when I think about all the things that I worked on that got just reversing what they reversed, whether it was helping protect trans kids in our nation's public schools or an equal pay regulation at the EOC and DOL. So there's definitely, it's pretty enticing. And, I literally wrote my book chapter about then Vice President Joe Biden and how he was just a good person. So, I'm pretty excited. And I would say that looking at the transition names that are coming out in the last couple of days, especially just the panelists of scientists who are going to rescue us from COVID, has been just heartwarming.
Molly, your section of Yes, She Can involves this event around the issue of foster care. It included, as you mentioned, Vice President Biden, a bevy of Hollywood stars, the screening of the film Annie. And before we talk about the event, I think it's really important to reiterate for those of you who know it and tell people who don't know it what a mess foster care is in our country. It's an issue that really motivated you to want to work on this. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's an issue that doesn't really get the spotlight a lot, but the basic stats are there's about 400,000 kids in the American foster care system at any given day. About 25,000 will age out every year, having never been reunited with their families or placed in a permanent family. The stats are pretty bad. I think it's about somewhere between 2 and 5% of kids who age out of foster care will graduate from a 4-year college. They have higher rates of PTSD than veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, the list goes on and on, everything we care about. They are dealing with criminal justice, homelessness, mental health issues, drug addiction, teen pregnancy. The list sort of goes on and on. And so, and also, I should say, from a policy perspective, for a very long time, our approach to dealing with foster care was to treat crisis with separation. And so this family separation that we're seeing at the border is actually not the only family separation that we have going on in the US. We, instead of treating families in crisis with help and intervention, we are separating them and saying that, you're unfit to be a parent, which is actually not good for kids in the long run. So that's my little policy soapbox.
There was this great moment at the event that you describe, and there was the Hollywood stars speaking and Vice President Biden speaking, but the moment that got me was one of the kids speaking.
Yeah. So we had a young person named John. So part of all of the work that I did, I wanted to make voices of young people who had experienced foster care or biological parents, foster parents, social workers, et cetera, had to be central part of the conversation, whether it's the policy side or like more of the public engagement side. And so before every kind of White House speaker, we had the USDA secretary who himself grew up in what was basically foster care for a little while, although this was 1950, so it was a little different. We had a young man named John who did one of those introductions, and he told the group about how before he got involved with this organization, Communities in Schools, that had brought him to us, that he had poor attendance, that he didn't really see a future for himself, but then he got involved with this organization, and he for the first time, he had perfect attendance, and that he knew that one day he was going to go to college. And literally, without skipping a beat, Jamie Foxx, the mega celebrity who was sitting in the front row because it was his film, leapt to his feet and started applauding in the middle of his remarks, his introduction remarks. And then the whole room was standing and applauding. And this is kind of, I'm a little bit spoiling it, but this is like the climax of my chapter. And he like lit up, and his shoulders melted, and he looked around at this room of people applauding for him. The vice president had just spoken, they were in Barack Obama's White House, being like, what a moment. And I got lots of texts from friends reading that chapter being like, why did you have to make me cry reading this book? It's the first chapter, I'm already crying. But that's how we approached all of our work. And it was about inclusion, it was about lifting up, it was about empowering. And it's been really hard, as Taylor said, the last couple of years, leaving the White House and feeling like, going from this place of hope to some pretty dark times that we're not out of. But I was thankful to have been able to memorialize it in this book and be able to share that, with young women. So, 40, 50 years from now, they can look back and be like, wow, I can't believe that X, Y, or Z. I'm curious to think what they will think is crazy the way we think like, what, you couldn't wear pants? So.
Taylor, the moment you talk about in the book is organizing a state visit by the Pope on a Jewish High Holy Day. What kind of stuck in your mind from pulling that whole thing together? Didn't you have to sleep overnight? You had to get there and sleep overnight there because you couldn't get into the White House in the morning because it was going to be so crowded?
Yes, that by the time we got to the actual event, it kind of felt like it was a slumber party. A bunch of staffers slept either on our bosses' couches or underneath their desks or whatever, and like stumbled out at 4 a.m. to walk across the South Lawn to go experience the arrival ceremony. But I think what sticks out to me is the process that you go, not even just like the event logistics, which are insane, but the process of preparing for a state visit and the number of offices and counterparts that are involved in creating the policy that you're going to announce and working across embassies, and that collaborative effort across an administration, what really stuck with me.
Well, we've only got a few minutes left, so if you do have a question for our guests, any kind of a question, I'll drop down to the Q&A section and write that question in, and we'll try to get it to our guests as quickly as possible before we finish up. Jill, I want to go back to you. In the epilogue of the Watergate Girl, you reflect on the impeachment of Donald Trump. Remember that? That also happened this year, in which he was acquitted by the US Senate. Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller has come under intense criticism by some for not delivering a strong report of particulars against President Trump. What do you think about how Mueller did?
I hate to criticize someone who tried. So let me say something positive first, which is I agree with Molly and Taylor that service in the public service is just such an allure that it's hard to ever turn it down. Being able to actually accomplish things that you could never accomplish in private life is so worth doing. as I look back at my career, I've been in and out of government because I never can say no. It's always so exciting. And I really look back and think of things like abolishing the Women's Army Corps, which may sound counterintuitive, but it meant that women could be part of the regular army, which means they could be generals. They could be the head of, for example, the Judge Advocate General Corps, which as a member of the Women's Army, they could not, because there were only 2 generals in the Women's Army, the head of the Women's Army Corps and the head of the Nursing Corps. So, I mean, those are things you cannot, get away with. But I don't mention Trump until the epilogue because, first of all, he wasn't part of my thinking when I started the book, but also because I think the parallels between the crimes that were committed in the Nixon administration and what happened during the Trump administration were so obvious that I didn't need to point them out. Anyone reading the book will see them. And so I point out some of the similarities and some of the differences between them. I think what's happening now is far more dangerous to democracy than anything Richard Nixon did. What's happening right this very minute with trying to impinge on the election that just happened, trying to make people think that the election isn't credible. That is a real threat to democracy, the foundation of which is the voting. So I think it's much, much worse now. We didn't have any foreign players involved in Watergate. We only had domestic people, and involving foreigners in both the impeachment, Ukraine, and the Russian interference in our election, I think is much more serious. So I think there are some real dangers that we're facing. And I think it was Mamele who said there's so much that needs to be undone. And she's right. There is so much. One of the things I want to see right away is someone being appointed as Attorney General who understands that that is a job where you represent the United States of America, not the president. I used to be very proud as a Department of Justice employee to go into court and say, on behalf of the people of the United States. And I don't think anyone's very proud anymore at the Department of Justice. So I'd like to see someone who is completely not political appointed as Attorney General, as opposed to having someone who will play the part to the president and who understands the role. So no one who's run for office should be appointed. It has to be someone who really gets the rule of law. So there's a lot to be done, and I encourage people to send in their resumes and consider seriously what you can contribute.
Bonnie, who's watching and listening, has this question for you. This is for all of you, I guess. There's so much division in this country. Do you have ideas that would focus on women and how to try to break down the hatred, leading all American women to support each other, since we have a woman vice president? And this is, of course, the top line question. Vice President Biden addressed it when he made his remarks the other day about how do we come together? And having been in the center of it, what are your thoughts about that? Mamele, let's start with you.
I had unmuted myself. So, I mean, my opinion is that, like, obviously I've worked on gender equity and a lot of these issues. Supporting someone just because she's a woman is not feminism. I didn't support Sarah Palin's candidacy. I don't particularly think that Nikki Haley has been a good representative to the United Nations. That's not feminism. And I think this idea that we all just like need to come together as a sorority, and I say that like as a woman who was literally in a sorority, is unrealistic and also like patronizing. That being said, I think the best way to like bring about that healing is to actually fight for real gender equity. And that's going to make some people uncomfortable. When Hillary Clinton said that she was not going to bake cookies, that made a lot of people uncomfortable. She was telling everyone they couldn't bake cookies. She just personally was not going to. Or maybe it was bake a pie. I might be getting the exact quote wrong. But I think that begins with actually like shining a light on how the patriarchy oppresses all of us. And 55% of white women voted for President Trump, who has stripped away our rights, who has sexually harassed, who has demeaned women over and over and over again. And so I don't know that I necessarily have answers, but I think it's more of an understanding like the role of the patriarchy in the last election, seeing the sexist attacks that were thrown at Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, that she was too ambitious, which is never a word that is used negatively towards men. So let's just also start calling it out and go from there.
Taylor, what are your thoughts on how we bring it all back together? I mean, when Joe Biden started his campaign for the presidency, he was seen as being too mainstream, and there were other candidates who were considered to be much more in tune with the times. And now he is the president. Like, some are saying the best thing that could happen to him is for a Republican Senate, so to force him to compromise on some of these issues as a way to bring the country together again. What are your thoughts?
I think I keep thinking back to the moral leadership and the example that will be set by this administration and by Joe Biden choosing a Black female VP as his running mate. I think that we've kind of forgotten what it's felt like to look to our leaders as a moral example. So I think that will go a long way. I agree with a lot of the comments Molly said. And I also think let's talk about how white men are voting as well. Like there's division among women, but if we're going to talk about what makes society as a whole better, that includes all of us, and that includes white men.
Jill Weinbecks, any thoughts on how we bring it together again after all this strife? And presumably we'll be able to.
So my first time running for office was, or for any kind of elected position, was running as a Biden delegate, which means that I supported him very early in the process. And the reason I supported him was because I thought that he was someone who could heal the divide. I know he has a huge hurdle to overcome in what is now the Senate. And I'm hoping that the voters in Georgia will help him out by sending 2 more Democrats to the Senate so that he has a hope of getting accomplished some of the things he'd like to accomplish. He is, I believe, by nature, a compromiser, but the problem is you have to have someone on the other side who's willing to compromise. And what I'm hearing from Mitch McConnell, if he keeps control of the Senate, is I'm not sure that they'll even approve cabinet officials, that they won't confirm them. I'm not sure that they will confirm any judges that are put forward. I don't know that they'll allow any legislation. The COVID relief hasn't happened, and yet they're pushing through Amy Coney Barrett and other judges, and people are starving who need the help. And that's how they're proceeding. So I'm a little less sanguine about the opportunities for compromise when we now have gerrymandered districts where no one has to compromise anymore. And the Republicans have shown no willingness to compromise. So you can't give up everything you want if the other side won't give part. So the only way we can get that is by, number one, having the Senate. I really believe that. And so everybody who's listening here who cares about democracy, who cares about going forward, you should be sending money to Georgia. You should be making sure that you are writing letters to voters in Georgia, that you are making phone calls into Georgia. Nothing is more important right now than that. And I think that Biden's intellect and heart and personality and character would allow him to accomplish it if he has a even slightly willing partner. And that's what has to happen. And I agree completely, especially with what Molly said about, I don't believe that only a woman can represent me. I believe someone who believes the same things that I believe can represent me. And in fact, you'll see, I think I do this in my book. I talk about times when I felt that a man might be a better spokesman for an idea I wanted, like, for example, abolishing the Women's Army Corps. Because if I do it, it's a woman's issue. If I get the Assistant Secretary for HR to work with Congress on it, it's an HR issue. It's a personnel issue. And so I think we all need to be aware of, you know, what is the best way to get the result you want, and keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, I think George Bush called it strategy. Jill, Molly, Taylor, it's been a pleasure to speak with you this evening. I really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you so much for it. And I guess we were going to return to Pamela for the benediction.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone. Ross, take a look in the Q&A if you feel that there's any other last minute questions, but I have my last minute question, if that's okay.
Go right ahead.
Obviously, the Jewish Book Council is our partner for this. So I'm curious because, you know, all of you have spoken a little bit about Jewish values and things like that that have encouraged you, whether it's growing up like you did, Jill, in Chicago in a tight-knit Jewish family. I believe your parents were Russian immigrants. Is that correct?
Lithuania and Austria.
Lithuania, Austria.
And they were born here, but my grandparents.
Got it. And Taylor and Molly, I know that the two of you have also, you know, talked a little bit about the Jewish concept of tikkun olam, which is repairing the world, which has translated to your government work and the service of bridging gaps and building bridges. I know Taylor in your interfaith work. So maybe first with Jill, I would be curious to know how, if at all, and it might not, are you informed at all in your work by, you know, Jewish values or your Jewish identity or your identification and the community? And then maybe Taylor and then Molly, if you could take us out on that note, I'd appreciate it. And then I just want to say thank you, everybody. And I'll say a few words at the end. Thank you. Jill, go ahead.
I would say that the Jewish values of community and giving back, feeling that I am blessed by what I have been given in this world and therefore must contribute something back to the world, definitely influences my political views, my government activities. And I'm very lucky because I grew up in a family that believed in democracy and politics and involvement. And I had only one or two minor episodes of what I would consider anti-Semitism. And one was fairly recent when I was at Maytag, where basically they planned a big event to celebrate the good results of the international division on the high holidays. And I saw it immediately when it came out. And I said, could you please change the date? And they said, well, you're the only one. And so they didn't change the date. And that's that. I'm very lucky that that hasn't been a major issue in my life. But I have been on the board of the ACLU, where we faced having the Nazis march in Skokie, and which is a very Jewish neighborhood. It's where I went to high school. I lived in Skokie. And so I'm very aware of it. And I just think that my family values and Judaism being a family structure, I mean, I think of Judaism partly being, you know, sitting around the Seder table and giving back. So I think it has influenced my career choices and my values.
Taylor, do you want to add to that?
Sure. And funny enough, Molly and I actually both grew up in the north side of Chicago near Jill. So I think that community feeling is ubiquitous. And for me, I didn't really feel that I identified with the Jewish part of my identity until I left Chicago. So that's just an interesting fact. But it's so much of the what I pull out of Judaism, especially these past 4 years, is that everyone has a role to play in repairing the world. You don't have to be serving in government. You could be volunteering. You could be this election cycle making calls and text banking and doing whatever you think that you can do in that moment to give back, and that justice prevails. And it just takes one person to kind of trigger that for your entire community, and that we all rely on each other to be that one person each and every day together.
Molly, do you have something to add? Take us out.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there must be something in the water on the North Shore of Chicago. Strong Jewish girls. Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. And then, personally, I've been thinking about like on one side of my family, my Bubby worked she lives in Baltimore. She's 90 and lives in Baltimore, and I will definitely send her the link to this recording so she can watch. Hey, Bubby. And she worked to resettle refugees coming out of the Soviet Union, and I have I don't know if they're memories or they're memories of seeing home videos, because I was quite young, about sitting around the Passover Seder and talking about what was happening behind the Iron Curtain and helping Jews escape. And then on the other side of my family, I actually was just thinking about this before our talk today, because tomorrow's Veterans Day, and my grandfather on the other side was a Polish Jew, came to America at 2 years old, but he joined the United States Army even before World War II had officially, the US had officially joined the Allies. And he returned to Europe to fight the Nazis, and fighting fascism, fighting for democracy, being a proud public servant. That was something that I knew about my whole life and definitely had an impact. And we have these amazing letters that he wrote during that time, where he wrote about the Holocaust as it was happening, because he was in the European theater. So all of these values passed on by my grandparents and my parents have definitely made their way through. I think any Jewish person you meet in civil rights you'd be hard pressed to find a Jewish person who doesn't talk about how their Jewish values have framed them. And I do think there is more work for the Jewish community to do, especially since the civil rights movement. I think we have drifted a little bit from how closely we were working, especially with the Black community in the US. And I look forward to continuing that work, whether I'm in government or not. Definitely part of how I exercise my faith.
Amazing. Well, it's been such an honor having you. I want to thank Ross Reynolds so much for your very skilled and adept way of bringing all of these amazing Jewish women together, and just women who are doing great things in the world. I agree, Molly, what you just said. I think there's a lot to be done. I was a student of the late and great Arthur Hertzberg at NYU, who marched with Martin Luther King. I'm really happy that we're showing a film and creating those conversations again in our own Seattle community coming up. But keep doing the great work. Thank you, Jill Weinbanks, for a beautiful book. I've put the links in the chat. They will continue to be premiered. There we go, at Island Books. So The Watergate Girl, an amazing and fascinating read, and very relevant for today's time. And Taylor and Molly, so grateful to have you both here and join us. And I love the fact that we've returned to the yes, anything message right now. And especially downstairs, I'm not in front of my huge hope poster, but it feels like your cover is reminiscent of that style art. And it's just so wonderful seeing the moment that we're in today to join together in a more positive moment. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much to our special guests. You can learn more about these books and join us by going to Island Books. And we hope to see you again soon. Thank you, panelists, very much, and be well, be safe, everyone. Thanks for joining. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.